Today about how to tune into the radio station. We're not going to talk about how to broadcast on a radio station. And in specific today, we're only going to tune into a system radio station, an iOS 7 radio station. Later in the course, when we start talking about building more sophisticated models using databases, then we'll really start using the radio stations to hear about changes in the model. Okay? But today we're just going to hear about change in the system because I just want to get an idea of what that radio station looks like on the receiving end. And it's really, really easy. There is a class called NS Notification Center. It has a class method called default center. That returns a shared instance, kind of like NS user defaults, standard user defaults did. A shared instance. That's the object you use to tune into radio stations. And you do it by sending it this message, add observer selector name object. The first argument, observer, that is the object that wants to listen to the radio station. So in your controller, because controllers are the most common radio station listers, this would probably just be self. Okay, add observer self. This is somewhere in your controller code. Selector is the method inside of the observer that you want to be called when something appears on the radio station. Some broadcast happens. Okay? Name is the name of the radio station. Okay, which radio station you want to listen to. And sender there, object sender, that's if you only want to listen to radio station broadcasts that come from a certain other object. Often you pass nil here, which means if anyone broadcasts on that frequency, I want to hear it. Okay? But it is possible in certain cases to say I'm only interested in changes in the radio station generated by this object. So that's what the sender there that you would put. Okay? The method that's going to get invoked here, method to invoke if something happens, always has one argument, which is an NS notification. Inside an NS notification, there are three properties. One is name. That's the name of the radio station, same thing that was passed above. Object, okay, that's the object sending you this notification. So that would be the sender in the thing above. And then user info, which is an ID. And to know what that is, you have to know what the person who broadcasts on the radio station says they will provide there. Does that make sense? So that user info is radio station dependent. So, but if you know the name of the radio station, you probably are looking in the documentation to find it. It probably says there, oh, and the user info you'll get is X, Y, or Z. But it's an ID, so you have to know what it is. You're probably going to do is kind of class on it, or response to selector, or something like that. To use it. A lot of times that's nil because all we really are interested in is whether there was a broadcast, not any particular information that was broadcast. Question?
The default center, is that global over just your app or global over the whole system?
All this stuff, the question is the sender there global to the whole system or just inside your app? Always, everything about notifications inside your app. Okay? Because the space of objects in the heap is only inside your app. You can't see in other apps. You know, they have their own segregated, for security reasons, space. So if you're getting a message here from the system, this is going to be nil. Okay, the sender's going to be nil. Question? Is that your question? Okay. All right. So another thing to understand is when you're done listening, tune out. Turn your radio off. Okay, and you do that by sending a message to the notification center saying remove observer. And you can remove yourself as an observer of all radio stations with the first one, or you can just remove yourself from listening to certain radio stations, okay, by specifying the name of the radio station and who the sender is you don't want to listen to anymore. Okay? It's important to do this because, unfortunately, the notification center keeps a pointer to you that is called unsafe retained. So it's not strong or weak, it's unsafe retained. And what unsafe retained means is that if you go out of the heap without calling this first, the notification center might try and send you a notification and crash your app. That's why it's unsafe. Now, why are they using unsafe retained here? Clearly, for backwards compatibility, this really should be weak. Okay? It'd be awesome for this to be a weak pointer to you because then if you went out of the heap, it would be set to nil inside the notification center. It would never try and send you any messages. But you know, the whole weak mechanism of setting things to nil automatically, that's an iOS 6, iOS 7 only thing. So if you had an app that was running on iOS 5, that wouldn't work. And if this depended on that, it would be bad. I'm sure eventually they would probably move these things to weak and just say, if you use this API, it's deprecated, you can't run on iOS 5. I don't know, maybe they'll do that in iOS 8 or 9, I don't know. But be careful there, it's unsafe retained. It's the only unsafe retained really you're probably going to have to worry about in this course. But the bottom line is, remove yourself when you're done listening. Now, normally you're going to remove yourself when your MVC goes off screen, okay? Because you're usually only interested in radio station happenings when your MVC is active and on screen. But if for some reason that doesn't make sense, there is a method called dealloc. Every object has this. It gets called just before your object leaves the heap. Okay? All your properties are nil. You're barely existing as an object, and this gets called. Okay? It's that last hook. And so you can fix unsafe retained pointers to you there. Okay? I don't recommend using dealloc. Don't use it for anything else, that's for sure, in this class. I suggest removing it when it makes sense. Your question?
You try to remove yourself as an observer and you're not an observer on anything? Is that kind of...
Great question. So the question is, what if I call remove observer and I'm not observing anything? No problem. Nothing bad will happen.
So you could just throw that in dealloc.
You could. It wouldn't be very nice programming because it's kind of not very pretty, but you could just throw that in your dealloc and to be safe. But better to, you know. Okay, so here's an example. This is the example I'm going to demo real quick here, which is text size. So in iOS 7, not in any iOS before that, but in iOS 7, if you use preferred fonts, then the user can actually go into settings and change the size of their font. So if they're like me, and the phone has to be held farther and farther away as the years go by, you can set the text size up and move that phone back in a little bit. So that's what this text size thing allows you to do. Well, if that text size font change happens, you have to get notified so that you can change the fonts. Use the new preferred font that the user set, okay? So you get that notification by signing up in the default center for the radio station called UI Content Size Category Did Change Notification. Okay, could argue it could be called something like preferred fonts change, but it's not. UI content size category did change notification, okay? You sign up for that, and whenever those fonts change size, your method, preferred font size change is what I called mine, will get called, okay? So let's take a look at how we would add that to Attributor, because Attributor uses preferred fonts, and if we change the font size, we want the body and the headline both to change to the bigger or smaller font. So let's do that. I'm going to go back here to Xcode. So here we are. The other thing we're going to need to make this work is the view controller lifecycle. Okay? Because we're only interested in those font changes if we're the MVC that's on screen, which we always are, of course, because we only have this one MVC. But soon we will have other MVCs, and we won't always be on screen. So let's use the view controller lifecycle method. View will appear. Okay. So when a view will appear, notice I'm always going to do super will view super there. You can call super before or after you do your work. It kind of depends on what you want. Do you want your superclass to get a chance after you've done what you want to do or before? Usually it doesn't matter too much. I don't know that UI View Controller actually does things in these supers, but you always want to give them the opportunity, okay? It's just part of the View Controller lifecycle. So when the view appears, I just want to sign up with the notification center so that I can receive these messages. So all I'm going to say is NS notification center, default center, add observer, self. Okay, I'm going to want these messages sent to myself. The selector, remember we have to say @selector when we want to specify thing. I'm going to call it preferred fonts changed. Okay, name is UI content size category. Ooh, luckily I get to tab through that one. Okay, and the object is nil. In other words, if anybody sends that, I'm going to change my preferred fonts. Okay, notice there's a warning here. That's because I don't implement this. I believe that's new in iOS 7. I don't remember seeing that before. Okay, thank you. Too many R's. Preferred. Okay, view, okay, void here, preferred. Whoops, 2 F's now. Okay, preferred fonts changed. Takes an NS notification star. Okay, notification. I'm not going to use that because it's just basically Boolean. And I'm actually going to call another method. I'm going to call use preferred fonts, and you're going to see why here in a second. Okay, so that set it up so that anytime my view appears, I'm going to get this use preferred fonts sent to me. Preferred fonts sent. And in here, I have to make my text view and my headline use the new preferred fonts. And that's really, really easy to do. Self.body.font equals UI font preferred for text style, UI font text style. This is the body, so I'm going to do body. So this has allowed me an excuse to show you how to set these preferred fonts in code instead of setting them in Xcode. This is how easy it is. Okay. Now I'm setting the font of the UI text view, so if I had any bolds or italics, unfortunately this would blast them. So obviously I would need to iterate through all the attributes and look at the font, get the symbolic traits, apply them like I talked about earlier. And then let's do the same thing for the headline, but its font wants to be the preferred font for headline, which is this one. Okay, so that's that. One last thing to consider here is I need to stop listening. We'll do it in will. Disappear, could do it in either, but. Okay, when I'm going to disappear, I want to stop listening. And so again, NS notification center, default center, remove observer. Now some would argue just putting self here, but I actually think that's bad coding because, you know, what happens if you add a new feature down the road where you're listening on a different radio station that you don't want to stop listening to when your view disappears, which is rare, but it's possible. So I actually think it's better here to use the version of this which remove observer that takes the name. So I'm going to say remove observer self, name is UI content, blah, 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 and the object is still nil. So I'm only going to remove myself as a listener from that one radio station. And there's one last thing to do here, which is what happens if my view appears, I start listening, it disappears, and then they go change the text style. And then I reappear. Okay? I will not be notified at that point because the change, the text style change happened while I wasn't listening. So turning your listening back on you don't get all the messages that happened while you weren't listening. You only get new messages. So that's why we probably want to say self use preferred fonts in view will appear. This is what I'm talking about where view will appear wants to sync up with the world when it starts. That's what view will appear is for. So view will appear is going to use preferred fonts, whatever are currently out there. Okay? That makes sense why I'm doing that? So let's run this and see if it works. Now I'm running this on your device, but on your simulator you can also go to the settings. So here's my text, right? So let's even go ahead and put some orange text in there. Okay, now I'm going to hit the home button and I'm going to go to settings, which is right here. I'm going to go down to general, I believe it is. Yeah, is that it? Yeah, text size. You see text size right there? You can see there's a slider. So let's make our text really big. Okay, go back. I can just go back to here. It's still running in the simulation.